The holding cell smelled like copper and recycled air, and the glass was thicker than my arm. I knew because I had already pressed both palms flat against it and pushed until my shoulders shook. Nothing, not even a creak. I stepped back, breathed once through my nose, and started counting ceiling panels instead. My name is Owen Garrett. I am 34 years old. I was a United Earth Marine for 8 years, and for the last 3 I had been a field xenobiologist attached to the Deep Survey Division, cataloging microbial colonies on airless rocks at the edge of explored space. I was, by any reasonable measure, one of the least important human beings the galaxy could have chosen to kidnap. That was going to be their problem. I did not know how long I had been unconscious. My watch was gone. My research kit was gone. My emergency beacon, the folding blade I kept in my boot, and the protein bars I always carried in my left jacket pocket were all gone too. What they had left me was my jacket, my trousers, my boots with nothing in them, and about 4 square meters of smooth-walled space, with a ventilation grill near the floor and a narrow slot in the door that I assumed was for food. I sat down cross-legged in the middle of the floor and started working through what I knew. My shuttle had been running a standard survey pass over a methane moon, designated LV-7 Bravo, when the proximity alarm went off. I had maybe 4 seconds between seeing the other vessel on the scanner and the hull breach. Whoever took me had used a fast seal puncture clamp, which meant they had done this before, many times, and had equipment built for it. The gas they pushed through the breach had no color and very little smell, just a faint sweetness at the back of the throat, and then the floor came up, and that was that. I thought about the vessel I had seen on the scanner for those 4 seconds. Long, dark, narrow at the front and wide at the back like a hunting bird folding its wings. I had never seen that hull configuration in any of the xenobiological databases I had access to, which meant either they were new to this region or they had been careful never to be seen near human space. The glass in front of me ran floor to ceiling. On the other side was a corridor, wide and softly lit with amber panels set into the walls. I could see 3 other enclosures across from mine. 2 were empty. One held a small creature about the size of a 10-year-old child, covered in fine gray fur, curled against the far wall with its knees pulled to its chest. It was watching me. I raised one hand slowly. Not a wave, just an open palm. The creature blinked 2 sets of eyelids, one horizontal and one vertical, and did not move. I heard them before I saw them. The sound was a series of low clicks, rapid and layered, like someone running a fingernail down a comb in fast repetition. It echoed down the corridor and grew louder, and then 2 of them walked past my cell without stopping, and I got my first clear look. They were tall, 2.5 meters, at least. They walked on 4 lower limbs, the rear 2 longer than the front, and they had 2 upper limbs that they held slightly away from their bodies, the way a fighter holds their hands ready. Their carapaces were deep blue-black, and caught the amber light in thin iridescent lines, like oil on water. Their heads were wide and flat at the crown, tapering to a narrow lower jaw, and their eyes were large, compound, and the color of old amber, faceted and unblinking. They clicked to each other as they walked, and the translator chip I later discovered they had implanted behind my left ear, while I was unconscious, rendered that clicking into something I could understand. "The new soft skin is awake," one of them said. The voice the chip gave it was flat and unhurried, like someone reading a list. "Category 3, the other said. "No threat assessment required. It will not survive the second cycle." They kept walking. They did not even glance at my cell. I sat very still for a long moment after they had gone, and I thought about what Category 3 meant in the context of a vessel that was clearly built to carry living creatures in enclosures. I thought about the biome I had read about in 3 separate xenobiological incident reports over the past year, none of which had been confirmed, all of which described a vessel that collected living beings from lesser-known species and released them into a constructed terrain for sport. I thought about the phrase, "will not survive the second cycle." Then I got up and started examining the ventilation grill. It was 12 centimeters by 8, fastened with 4 recessed screws of a type I did not recognize, and the air coming through it was cool and faintly sweet. Not the same gas as before, just circulated ship air. The grill was not large enough to crawl through, but that was not why I was looking at it. I was looking at it because it told me where the mechanical systems were relative to my cell, and that told me something about the ship's layout. I had been a Marine. We did not spend 8 years learning how to follow orders. We spent 8 years learning how to read a space and find the exit. The gray-furred creature in the enclosure across the corridor was still watching me. I turned to face it fully and pointed at my own chest. "Owen," I said quietly. I did not know if sound passed easily through the glass. I mouthed it slowly. "Owen." It watched me for a long moment. Then it pointed at itself with one small 3-fingered hand. Its mouth moved. The translator chip caught nothing, which meant the chip was calibrated to the species that had taken me, and possibly a few others, not to whatever this creature was. But it was pointing at itself. That was enough. That was a start. The amber lighting in the corridor shifted slightly, going warmer, and I heard a deep vibration through the floor that I recognized as a ship changing heading. We were going somewhere. Given the speed of the intercept and the cleanliness of the operation, I guessed they were not going far. Whatever they had planned was already close. I went back to the center of my cell and sat down again. I rolled up my left sleeve and looked at the small raised point behind my ear, where they had put the chip, feeling it with 2 fingers. It was seated deep. Pulling it out without the right tools would hurt badly and might not work. I left it alone. It was more useful in than out. I thought about the 2 hunters in the corridor, the way they moved, the angle of their eyes, the spacing of their limbs. I had spent 3 years studying non-human biology. I had spent 8 years before that studying how to stay alive in environments that wanted to remove that condition. The Vorkai, which was the name the chip translated from their own clicking speech, were built for speed and for distance vision. Their compound eyes gave them a wide field of view, but the chip had caught something interesting in a secondary exchange farther down the corridor. One of them had mentioned close-range confirmation being handled by sensor equipment rather than natural sight, meaning their own vision had a gap somewhere near and directly in front of them. They compensated with technology. Technology could be broken. Eyes could not. I looked across at the gray creature. It had uncurled slightly. It was still watching me with those double-lidded eyes, and there was something in the quality of its attention, careful and measuring, that I recognized. It was doing exactly what I was doing. It was taking stock. I almost smiled. Outside, beyond the amber-lit corridor and the smooth walls of this elegant, terrible ship, the stars were going past at speed. I could not see them. I did not need to. I knew they were there the same way I always knew where the horizon was, by instinct, by the deep animal certainty that the world did not end at the edge of my vision. Somewhere down the corridor, the Vorkai were clicking to each other, confident and unhurried, discussing their Category 3 acquisition the way a handler discusses a mildly interesting piece of luggage. I pressed my back against the wall, pulled my knees up, and started memorizing the angle of every shadow in the corridor. When the slot in the door opened the next cycle, and a tray slid through, I ate everything on it without looking at it, because I was going to need every unit of energy my body could store. The hunt, as far as the Vorkai were concerned, had not yet begun. As far as I was concerned, it had started the moment I woke up on their floor. The biome doors opened, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. Green and wet and alive, in a way that no recycled ship air ever managed. And for 1/2 second my body forgot everything that was happening, and just breathed it in, because it smelled like the forests of the Pacific coast where I had grown up. Then the doors sealed behind me, and the smell became information. There were 9 of us released into the terrain. I had seen the others through the glass as we were moved from the holding level to the release corridor. 6 species I had never encountered in person. 2 I recognized from xenobiology files, and the small gray creature, whose name I had finally managed to understand through patient miming over 2 ship cycles, was Tail. Tail had communicated to me, in the silent language of careful gesture and repeated pointing, that the biome was large, that the Vorkai hunters entered from multiple points, and that the hunts usually lasted 3 cycles. Most prey, Tail's hands told me, did not survive cycle 2. The moment the others were released, they moved. The 6 unfamiliar species scattered in different directions, fast and panicked, crashing into the undergrowth and disappearing within seconds. The 2 I recognized from files followed them, not as fast but just as frightened. Tail looked at me with those double-lidded eyes, and I could see the tension in its small body, the way every muscle was coiled and ready to run. I started walking slowly toward the tree line. Not running. Walking. Looking at the ground, the sky, the way the light fell through the canopy above. The biome was perhaps 3 kilometers across, oval-shaped, based on the curvature of the far wall I could just barely see through the canopy, before it blurred into a simulated horizon. The floor was mixed, soft soil near the center, rocky ground rising to a ridge on the north side, and a shallow body of still water to the east that caught the artificial light and held it like a mirror. The vegetation was a hybrid design, nothing from any single planet, built to look wild, but carefully engineered to provide cover without being impassable. Whoever had built this had thought about it carefully. They wanted the prey to be able to hide. A hunt with no hiding was just a harvest, and that was apparently not what the Vorkai wanted. They wanted the chase. I reached the tree line and stopped. I turned around and looked at the release doors, which were now invisible, sealed flush with a rock face designed to look natural. Then I looked at the sky. The light source was a broad panel, amber warm, positioned to mimic a mid-afternoon sun. There were no shadows from the panel structure visible, which meant it was either very high or very well disguised. I noted the direction of the light and oriented myself. Tehel had followed me at a distance. It stopped when I stopped, watching me look at the sky, and I could see it was confused. Running was the logical response. Everything about this situation said run. I could feel that pull in my own legs, old wiring from the same deep place where all fear lived. I had learned, a long time ago, that the first 30 seconds of a crisis were the most dangerous. Not because of what the enemy was doing, because of what your own body wanted to do. Your body wanted to run or freeze, and both of those responses would keep you alive for approximately as long as it took your enemy to notice the movement or the stillness. After 30 seconds, if you were still breathing, what kept you alive was thinking. I had passed 30 seconds. Now I was thinking. The soil near the tree line was soft enough to take a print clearly. I studied the ground moving east toward the lake, found what I was looking for within 4 minutes. A faint impression, not a boot, not a paw, but a 6-limbed spread with a defined rear ridge that matched the Vorkai foot structure I had observed. One of them had come through here recently to do a pre-hunt sweep. The print was maybe 4 hours old based on the moisture at the edges. More importantly, it told me how they moved through the terrain. They favored the edges of open ground, keeping tree cover on at least one side. Ambush predator instinct. Good for surprising prey. Less good if prey knew to expect it and moved through the open instead. I crouched beside Tail and held up 2 fingers, then swept them in a slow arc. Then I pointed at the soil and at my own eyes. Tail looked at the print, then at me, then made a gesture I was beginning to read as something between surprise and very reluctant respect. I stood up and started moving parallel to the tree line, toward the lake, at a steady, unhurried pace. Within the first hour, I found 3 things that mattered. A cluster of broad-leafed plants near the lake edge whose stems were hollow and could be snapped cleanly without noise. A deposit of dark clay along the northern bank, the kind that held its shape and dried slowly. And a slope on the north ridge, where loose rock had collected at the base, in a way that suggested the high ground above was unstable. I packed the dark clay onto every exposed area of my face, neck, and hands, working it into an even layer, then into my hair. Tail watched this process with absolute fascination and made a small sound I had come to recognize as a question. I pointed at my skin, then up at the amber light panels, then made a spreading gesture. Heat. The clay would not block all of it, but it would diffuse the thermal signature, soften the edges. The Vorkai's sensor equipment could still find me, but a diffuse soft reading looked different from a sharp, warm, human-shaped outline. It bought time. Time was the only currency that mattered right now. I took the hollow plant stems and cut 6 of them to the same length using a sharp-edged flat rock I had found. A rock I tested carefully on the clay before I used it near myself. I split one end of each stem at an angle, which created a taut surface when dried. Not a weapon, a component. I set them aside. I had been moving for about 90 minutes when I heard the first one. The Vorkai did not move silently. They moved carefully, which was different. Careful movement in dense vegetation still makes sound, just controlled sound. The deliberate placing of limbs, the slow passage through undergrowth. What gave this one away was a pattern I recognized from years in places where things were trying to find me. The sound had a shape. It started, stopped, started again, always with the same interval. a sensor sweep being confirmed by physical movement. It was methodical. It was confident. It was coming from the east, between the lake and my current position. I moved north without hurrying, staying in the band of mid-density undergrowth, where movement was possible, but sightlines were broken. Tail stayed directly behind me, and I noticed something I had not expected. The small creature moved almost silently. Not trained silence, instinctive silence. The kind that came from being small on a planet where being small meant being eaten. I filed that observation away. I reached the base of the north ridge and worked my way up carefully, testing each foothold, keeping my weight low and distributed. Near the top, I found the unstable section I had identified from below, a wide shelf of loose flat rock, stacked by geological process into something that looked solid, but was not. The Vorkai below had no reason to avoid this slope. The terrain looked passable. I identified the point where the stack was most fragile, found a long branch from a fallen tree near the ridge, and wedged it under the keystone at the base of the stack. Not a trigger, a lever. I balanced it carefully, tested the tension, and backed away, holding the other end of the branch, which extended down into the dense undergrowth behind a large outcrop where I could sit without being visible. I settled in. I slowed my breathing. I waited. 7 minutes. That was how long it took for the Vorkai hunter to work its way up the slope below. I heard it through the rock, vibration first, then the careful clicking that I now understood was their natural communication, mixed with a sharper set of sounds I was beginning to read as sensor confirmation tones. It reached the base of the unstable section and paused, sweeping. I was behind rock, coated in clay, breathing in shallow controlled pulls. Whatever it was reading from its sensors, I was not presenting as a clear target. It moved forward onto the unstable shelf. I pulled the branch. The sound was enormous, not an explosion. Rock does not explode, but a rolling cascade that went on for 4 full seconds, loud and final, sending a fan of displaced stone across the slope. Dust rose in a soft cloud. A Vorkai hunter that massed perhaps 200 kilograms hit the base of the ridge and did not move. I was already going down the other side of the ridge, moving fast now that speed mattered more than silence. Tail caught up with me at the bottom. Its double-lidded eyes were very wide. It pointed back at the ridge, then at me. I shook my head slowly and touched my palm flat to the air in front of me. Not finished. Not even close. Up on the ship, in the observation deck with its panoramic screens showing every camera in the biome, there was a long silence. Then a Vorkai in pale robes, the collector, the owner of this vessel and this hunt, leaned forward in his seat. "Recalibrate the category system," he said quietly to the aide beside him. "Run a full species file on Earth, the complete file, every archived entry." The aide was already pulling data. Its fingers paused over one entry. Then it read aloud, slowly. "Their planet," the aide said, "has more apex predator species per square kilometer than any cataloged biosphere in Vorkai hunting history." A pause. "The humans compete with all of them." Another pause. Longer. "And they win consistently," the aide finished. The collector watched the screen where Owen Garrett was moving through the undergrowth at a steady, completely unhurried pace, heading toward the next point he had already identified before anyone on the ship had realized he was moving with a plan. "Upgrade him," the collector said softly. "Category 1. No one in the observation room said anything. They were all watching the same screen. Down in the biome, Tetel made a small sound beside Owen that the translator chip rendered as something between a question and a quiet, astonished recognition. Owen did not look up from the ground he was studying. "I know," he said, very quietly. "I'm just getting started." They came for me in pairs the second time, which told me they had learned something from the first encounter. That was good. I needed them to learn. A hunter who does not adapt is not hunting. They are just walking through terrain hoping something holds still long enough, and I had no intention of holding still. I had been moving for nearly 3 hours by the time the second approach began, and in those 3 hours, I had done 6 things that mattered. I had confirmed the positions of all 4 entry points the Vorkai used when entering the biome, identified by the faint mechanical hum of the sealed panels and a thin line of different colored soil where the floor panels joined. I had built 2 additional devices from materials available in the terrain. I had located Tell a safe position at the base of a root system near the lake, protected on 3 sides by natural rock, with a clear line of sight to the water and 2 exit paths. I had found and consumed a handful of the small starchy tubers that grew in clusters near the clay deposit, which the xenobiology side of my brain identified as almost certainly non-toxic to human biochemistry based on their cellular structure, and which turned out to taste like unsalted crackers. I had drunk from the lake, which the same part of my brain assessed as filtered and clean based on its clarity and the lack of any surface chemistry, and I had found the one place in the biome where the camera coverage had a gap. That last one had taken the longest, but it was the most important. Every surveillance system has geometry. Wide-angle cameras covering a large space create overlapping zones, and the overlaps are designed to make sure nothing goes unseen, but the design is only as good as the installer's patience. In a space this size with this many cameras, there was a point somewhere in the terrain where the angle of coverage from 2 adjacent cameras created a blind column maybe 2 meters wide and 4 meters tall. I had found it by watching where the lens housings pointed from different positions and doing the geometry in my head. It was behind the rock outcrop on the west side, close to the main root system, and I had spent exactly 11 minutes in it, completely invisible to the ship above, doing something I did not want observed. I was building. I had 3 pulse lance power cells by that point. The Vorkai hunter who had gone down on the north ridge had been carrying 2 on a belt harness, which had detached cleanly when the rockfall separated it from its previous owner. The hunter had not been seriously injured. I was reasonably certain of that, based on the way the fall had gone, winded and shaken, and pinned rather than crushed. I had taken the cells and the lance itself, and moved before the others arrived to help. The 3rd cell had been in a secondary pouch I found wedged under a root, where a previous hunt's equipment had apparently been lost and never recovered. A pulse lance was designed to fire a focused electromagnetic burst. What most species who encountered Vorkai technology did not know, because they had no reason to know, was that the power cell of a pulse lance used a capacitor architecture that could be physically modified to release its charge in a spread pattern rather than a focused beam if the internal discharge plate was repositioned. I knew this because I had spent 3 years studying xenobiological tech as part of my survey work, and because the Vorkai were not the only species to use this capacitor type. A human engineering firm had filed a parallel patent on the same architecture 11 years ago. I had taken one of the cells apart with a sharp rock and a strip of hardened clay, and put it back together differently. It was not elegant. It was not safe by any formal definition, but it would work. The 2 hunters came from the south and the west, a coordinated approach designed to compress my movement options. I was already north of them, near the ridge again, but not at the top. I was in the undergrowth at the mid-slope, completely still, with the clay thick on every surface of my skin, and my breathing as shallow as I could make it without going lightheaded. They were using a new pattern. One moved and one waited, alternating, so that there was never a moment when both of them were in motion and therefore creating sound. That was smart. That was the adaptation I had expected. I had adapted to the adaptation before they arrived. I had placed the hollow plant stems I had prepared earlier at 3 points along the south approach. Not weapons, sound sources. Each one was balanced, so that the passage of a large body within 2 meters would disturb them enough to produce a faint hollow knock. Not enough to alarm a careful hunter, but enough to make them pause and sweep. The first stem knocked. The southern hunter paused, swept, found nothing interesting, moved on. The second one knocked. Another pause. Another sweep. The hunter was now 50 meters south of my position and slightly off its intended line, drawn left by the second sound source. The western hunter was holding position, waiting for its partner to clear the approach. Standard technique. Leaves the stationary hunter exposed to a flanking movement for exactly as long as it takes the moving hunter to establish the all clear. I came downhill from the north, fast and low, staying in the dead ground between 2 large root systems that I had identified earlier as blocking the western camera angle. The western hunter heard me at 3 meters. Its head came around. Its compound eyes found me. I was already inside the critical distance, under 1.2 meters. Tail had told me, through careful gesture and repeated pointing over 2 ship cycles, that the Vorkai's compound vision had a close-range gap. a focal blind spot almost directly in front of them at less than 1.5 meters. They compensated with sensor equipment. The sensor equipment required a moment to switch focus from distance scanning to close-range confirmation. That moment was not long. Half a second, maybe less. I used it. I was not faster than a Vorkai. I was not stronger. What I was, at that specific distance, was at an angle where its natural vision could not properly track me, and its sensors had not yet caught up. I went low and to the left, under the upper limbs, and used the leverage of my full body weight behind a strike to the joint where the rear left limb connected to the main carapace. The Vorkai equivalent of a hip, essentially, and a joint under significant mechanical stress when the limb was bearing weight. The hunter went sideways and down, hard, and the sensor equipment in its harness skittered across the soil and stopped 3 meters away. I was already moving before it registered what had happened. The southern hunter came north fast at the noise, abandoning its careful pattern. I heard it. I moved east, toward the lake, staying in the camera blind zones I had mapped, cutting through the densest part of the undergrowth where my body size was less of a disadvantage than in open ground. I reached the eastern bank and stepped into the shallows, moving along the edge where the mud held my thermal signature down. Behind me, the southern hunter reached the western hunter, found it down and unable to move cleanly on one limb, and the clicking between them became fast and sharp. They were not communicating to each other, I realized. They were reporting. There was a receiver somewhere in their harnesses, and they were reporting back to the ship. I stayed in the shallows and let the cool water do its work on my heat signature, and thought about that. They were reporting in real time, which meant someone on that ship had been watching everything. Every trap, every movement, every decision I had made since the biome doors opened. Good. I straightened up and turned to face the camera housing I could see mounted on the east wall of the biome, partially hidden in a fake rock cluster. I held still for 3 full seconds, looking directly at it. Then I turned and walked back into the undergrowth with the same unhurried pace I had been using since the beginning. In the observation deck above, the collector had stopped leaning back in his seat sometime during the second encounter. He was sitting forward now, both upper limbs on the console in front of him, watching the screen. The aide beside him had stopped talking. Every camera in the biome was tracking Owen Garrett. He appeared on 12 screens simultaneously, walking slowly west through the undergrowth, and the thing that silenced the observation deck was not what he had just done to 2 highly trained Vorkai hunters, using nothing but a branch, a rock, and the geometry of close-range vision. It was that he was clearly not done. He was not hiding. He was not fleeing. He was not even breathing hard. He looked, one of the junior observers said quietly, like someone taking a walk in a familiar place. "Pull the remaining hunters back," the collector said. The lead hunt coordinator turned in his seat. "Collector, we still have." "Pull them back," the collector said again. "All of them. Now." The coordinator sent the recall signal. Down in the biome, Owen Garrett heard the 4 faint chimes that sounded through the terrain. He stopped walking. He looked up at the nearest camera. He nodded once, slowly, the way a person nods when something they expected to happen has finally happened on schedule. Then he looked at Tail, who had emerged from the root system and was crossing the terrain toward him at a careful trot. "They are calling them back," Tehel said, in the clicking language that the chip translated. And there was something new in its voice now, something that had not been there in the holding cell, or in the corridor, or even at the start of the biome. "They are afraid of you." Owen crouched down to Tail's eye level. He thought about that for a moment. "They should be," he said, "but not for the reason they think." Tail's double lids blinked in that slow, considering way. "What reason do they think?" Owen looked around at the terrain, at the lake, at the ridgeline to the north, at the 12 cameras watching him from every angle. "They think I am dangerous, because I can fight," he said. "That is not why I am dangerous." He stood up. "I am dangerous because I can think, and I do not stop, and I know exactly where the exit is." He started walking west again, and this time he was not walking away from anything. He was walking toward the ship. The maintenance shaft was not hidden well. That surprised me a little. It was set into the west wall behind a cluster of artificial boulders, sealed with a panel that used a standard pressure release mechanism, the kind designed to allow quick biome maintenance access from the interior, without the crew having to suit up and enter from outside. The panel had a small indicator light on its inner edge, barely visible unless you were looking for it, a faint green pulse that meant sealed from the inside. I had seen it on my second pass through the west side of the terrain, which I had done specifically to find it. I used the flat edge of the modified pulse lance power cell, which was the hardest and most precisely shaped object I had available, to depress the release point that the indicator light told me was directly behind the panel seam. It took 4 attempts and about 90 seconds. On the 4th attempt, the panel gave with a soft click and swung inward. The shaft beyond was narrow, lit by a thin strip of blue maintenance lighting, and smelled like machine oil, and the same recycled ship air I remembered from the holding level. Metal rungs ran up one wall. I looked at Tail. It looked back at me. I made the gesture I had developed for question over the past 3 days. Both hands open, a small questioning tilt of the head. Tail pointed up the shaft. Then it pointed at itself. Then it placed both small hands together in a gesture I had come to understand as certainty. It was coming with me. I went first. Tail followed, moving up the rungs with a speed and confidence that reminded me again that it was built for climbing, in a way that I simply was not. I kept pace, arms burning by the 3rd junction, and emerged onto a maintenance corridor that ran along the outer hull of the biome enclosure, 1 level above the terrain. The corridor connected to the wider ship via a series of sealed hatches, each one using a simpler mechanism than the biome panel, because this level was not considered a security risk. No one escaped from the inside of a working hunt by going up. That logic made sense if you assumed the prey would be trying to escape. I was not trying to escape. I was going somewhere specific. The first hatch opened into a service corridor on the holding level. I recognized the smell. Cool air, copper, recycled and slightly stale. I also recognized the layout, because I had spent considerable time studying the geometry of the ship from the small window slit in my cell, and the service corridor ran in the same direction, relative to the amber panels I had seen from outside. I moved quickly now. Speed had become more useful than caution. The recall signal had been sent, which meant the remaining hunters were returning to the ship through one of the biome entry points, which meant the corridor system was about to become busier. I had maybe 10 minutes before the confusion of a recalled hunt gave way to the organization of a ship-wide alert. I found the other enclosures on the holding level by following the smell of the air scrubbers, which cycled more heavily in areas with more occupants. 6 enclosures, each with its own panel release. Each one took between 15 and 60 seconds to open. I did not have time to explain the situation to each occupant, or to do anything more than slide the panel open and step back. Some of them stayed. The ones who were too frightened, or too injured, or simply too deep in shock to understand what an open door meant. I did not try to force them. I could not carry anyone. 2 of the beings followed me, keeping close and keeping quiet, which told me they had survived this long on this ship by being fast observers. Tail stayed at my side throughout. I reached the crew level via a secondary access ladder I found by following the power conduit bundles that ran along the service corridor ceiling. Power conduits always run toward the parts of a ship that use the most power. On a vessel like this, that meant the bridge and the main engines, and the bridge was the one I needed. The crew level was different from the holding level. Wider corridors, richer lighting, a surface material on the walls that was not metal but something smoother and darker, a composite that absorbed sound slightly. I passed 3 crew members who saw me and stopped entirely. Not in shock. In a more complicated kind of stillness, the kind that comes over a person when something is happening that falls outside the boundaries of the possible. They were support crew. They were not trained for a situation where the Category 3 acquisition walked off their hunt floor and down their corridor. I did not run. I did not raise the modified power cell I was carrying. I simply kept walking, steadily and without hesitation, and the crew members stepped aside in the same way that traffic steps aside for a vehicle moving with complete confidence. Certainty of purpose is a kind of authority that has nothing to do with rank. I found the bridge because the blast door at the end of the crew corridor was the only door that was sealed. That told me everything. Someone had sealed it manually after seeing me on the cameras. They had pulled the crew behind the blast door and locked it. There was one reason to lock a door that thoroughly and that fast. The person behind it was frightened, and they knew the frightening thing was coming. I looked at the door. Solid. Multi-layer. Not something I was going to move by force or by any mechanism I could engineer with available materials. I had not planned to. I knocked. 3 slow, even knocks. The sound they made was soft and clear in the quiet corridor. Silence for a long moment. Then a voice came through an intercom panel set into the wall beside the door, translated by the chip into something flat and careful. "You cannot enter this section." "I know," I said. "I am asking you to open the door." Another silence. Longer. "What do you want?" the voice said. "3 things," I said. "I will explain them when you open the door. None of them require anyone to be harmed." The silence this time was the kind that had texture, the kind where multiple people were deciding something together. I waited. I was good at waiting. Persistence was the whole of the human strategy, in the end. Not speed, not strength, just the ability to keep being present until the situation resolved in the direction you needed. The blast door unsealed with a sequence of deep mechanical sounds and slid open. Inside the bridge there were 9 Vorkai, and the one standing at the front of the room, in pale robes, with amber eyes that held something I had not seen in any Vorkai face since I had been taken, which was genuine uncertainty, was the Collector. 2 armored guards stood to either side of him, both with weapons raised. I set the modified power cell down on the floor of the corridor behind me, in full view. I straightened up, and held my hands open at my sides. The guards did not fire. Something about the stillness did it. I had read about this in a psychology text I had studied in my 3rd year at the Survey Division, a description of how large predators on several different planets communicated threat without physical action, direct eye contact, sustained beyond the point where a prey animal would look away. Absolute stillness, that was not the stillness of fear, but of readiness. A quality of attention that was focused and complete and did not flicker. The guards were looking at something their training had not prepared them for, which was a being that was clearly aware it was in a room with weapons pointed at it, and had not changed its behavior at all. The Collector looked at me for a long moment. "You came here," he said finally, "without a weapon." "I did not need one," I said. "You could have used the cell to destroy the door mechanism," he said. "You knocked instead." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that in a way that would translate correctly. "Because the goal of a hunt is not to cause harm," I said. "The goal is to establish who is in control of the terrain. I established that in the biome. I am establishing it again here. Destroying the door would have been destruction for its own sake, and I do not do things for their own sake." The Collector was very still. His guards had lowered their weapons by about a quarter, not all the way, but enough to tell me they were listening to the same logic. "What are your 3 things?" the Collector said. "The first is the release of every living being in your holding level," I said. All enclosures opened. Coordinates for the nearest neutral station transmitted to whatever navigation systems their original vessels had, or transport provided if those vessels are gone. The Collector did not respond immediately. "The second," I said, "is the coordinate data for this vessel's position and heading, transmitted to Earth Diplomatic Services, under my field operator authorization." The aide near the back of the bridge made a small sound. I continued. "The third is a statement, recorded and transmitted on whatever network carried your broadcast of today's hunt, clarifying what occurred in this biome and who was responsible. On the record, with full identification of this vessel, this operation, and its operators." The bridge was absolutely quiet. The Collector looked at his guards. He looked at his aide. He looked back at me. "You understand," he said slowly, "that the third item will end this operation permanently, the legal consequences alone." "I am aware," I said. "And if I refuse?" I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I held eye contact with the amber compound eyes across the bridge and let the silence exist. "You will not refuse," I said. "Not because I am threatening you. Because you have already understood, in the last several hours, that the harm you risk from my refusal is considerably larger than what you risk from my 3 requests." The Collector looked at me for a very long time. Then he turned to his aide. "Authorize the releases," he said. "All of them. And open a broadcast channel." The neutral station was called Ven Reach. I brought the Collector's personal shuttle in on the approach vector the station transmitted, and matched the docking collar on the 3rd attempt, because the manual controls were designed for Vorkai physiology, and my hands were the wrong number of fingers. The station crew who met us at the dock were a mixed species team, and 3 of them went very still when I stepped off the shuttle, and they saw a human in clothes that were dirty and torn and coated in dried clay, leading a group of freed captives. Tehel stayed close to my left side. The 2 beings who had followed me from the holding level stayed together near the rear. 4 others had chosen to join us at the last moment, coming aboard the shuttle in the minutes before I undocked, having apparently decided that leaving with me was a better choice than waiting for formal diplomatic arrival. I did not blame them. I would have made the same call. The station medical team took everyone else first, which was correct. I sat on a bench in the docking bay and filled out an incident report on a station terminal, using a translation interface that was better than the chip behind my ear. The report was 12 pages by the time I finished, and I sent it to Earth Diplomatic Services, the Survey Division, the United Earth Marine Corps Historical Records Office, and 1 personal address. My mother had asked me, when I took the xenobiology posting 3 years ago, whether deep survey work was safe. I had told her it was mostly quiet. The incident report, I decided, would serve as the full explanation. She would understand. She had always been a precise reader. Tail sat beside me on the bench while I typed. After a while it made the small questioning sound. "Are you going to go back out there?" it asked. The chip had been improving its translation of Tail's language continuously since our first session of gestures in the holding cell, and now I could understand it well enough for conversation. "To space?" I said. "Yes, eventually. After what happened." I looked at the report on the terminal, 12 pages. An incident involving 6 documented Vorkai hunters, 1 collector-class vessel, 9 confirmed captive species, a biome of approximately 3 square kilometers, and 1 human field operator, resolved in 3 cycles. "Because of what happened," I said. Tehel was quiet for a moment. "Are all humans like you?" I thought about that question carefully. It deserved a careful answer. "No," I said. "Some of them are much scarier." Tehel's double lids blinked slowly. It made the sound that I had come to understand, over 3 days of close company in difficult circumstances, as something between a quiet laugh and the sound a being makes when it has decided, after considerable uncertainty, that it is safe. I finished the report and sent it. The broadcast the collector had transmitted from the ship, the 3rd thing I had asked for, had already been running for 4 hours by the time we docked. Stations across the local network were carrying it. I did not watch it. I did not need to. I had been present for the recording. What I did see, while sitting on the bench, was the data stream running on a secondary terminal across the docking bay. Transmissions were coming in from multiple species contacts, some to the station, some to the Vorkai collector's vessel identification code, some to the general frequency. Most of them I could not read because the translation interface was busy with my report. One came in on a frequency that the station system flagged as human adjacent, a signal with Earth diplomatic coding, and that one the terminal translated automatically. It was from the DipServ office at the nearest human consulate, 3 days away by standard travel. It said, in the careful formal language that diplomatic offices used when they were controlling their tone very deliberately, "Incident acknowledged. Diplomatic vessel dispatched. Please hold position and do not take any further unilateral action." I read that last part twice. Do not take any further unilateral action. I sat back on the bench. I looked up at the ceiling of the docking bay. I thought about the last 3 days. Then I looked at the terminal again and typed a reply that said, "Understood. Holding position. No further action required. Situation is resolved." I sent it and closed the report window. There was one more transmission on the general frequency. I had almost missed it. A short signal from an unregistered source tag, which meant either a very old vessel or a very deliberately anonymous one. The station system had translated it automatically because it was flagged as high priority by the network routing system, which meant something in the signal's metadata had told the network it needed to be seen. It said, "We know what humans are." We said this before. We said never approach them. No one listened. Perhaps they will listen now. There was no identification attached. No species tag, no vessel ID, no contact frequency. I stared at that message for a long time. Teo looked at the terminal, then at me. "What does it say?" "Someone in the galaxy already knew," I said slowly. "They have known for a while." "Known what?" I thought about how to explain it. The real answer was long. It ran back through the entirety of human history, on a single difficult planet, through every year of competing with things larger and faster and better armed than us, through everything we had built and broken and rebuilt, through every time we had faced something that should have ended us, and decided, with the particular stubbornness that no other species in the known galaxy seemed to share in quite the same way, that today was not the day. The short answer was simpler. Known that we do not stop, I said. Tail was quiet for a moment. Outside the docking bay window, the stars were the same stars they had always been, indifferent and countless, and very far away. Humanity had been a small thing on a single difficult world for most of its existence, and then it had built ships and gone looking, and the galaxy had not known what to make of us yet, not most of it. That was changing now. Is that frightening? Tail asked. That you don't stop? I thought about the biome, the clay on my hands, the sound of the rockfall, the long, patient walk toward the blast door on a ship full of beings who had assumed I was Category 3, and the look in the collector's amber eyes when he understood his mistake. It depends, I said, on which side of it you are standing on. Tail made the small sound again, the one I had learned to read as something between a laugh and relief. Then it rested its small gray head against my shoulder and closed both sets of eyelids, and I realized it was exhausted, in the way that you are exhausted when something you were very afraid of is genuinely over. I let it rest. Across the docking bay, the dip-serve terminal chimed with a second transmission, this one acknowledging my reply. At the bottom of the formal message, below all the official language about incident protocols and diplomatic procedures, and the formal request for a complete debrief upon the vessel's arrival, someone had added a single line that was not official language. Someone in the consulate who knew what I had done, and had apparently felt that the official message did not quite cover it. The line said, "Well done, Owen." I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked back out at the stars. 3 days ago I had been studying microbial colonies on an airless rock. Now my 12-page incident report was moving through diplomatic channels. A collector's vessel was sitting dark and silent near the station, while its crew waited for the arrival of formal authorities. And somewhere out in the network, a broadcast was running that had told several thousand watching species something they had not known before. Not that humans were dangerous. Plenty of species were dangerous. That humans were dangerous in a specific, careful, deliberate, patient way that did not stop when it was tired, or frightened, or outnumbered. That when you put a human in a situation designed to end them, what you had actually done was give them a problem to solve, and humans had been solving problems for so long and under such difficult conditions that they had gotten very, very good at it. The Vorkai had built a category system to sort their acquisitions. They had looked at me, a single soft-skinned creature from a species they had never bothered to research, and they had put me in the lowest tier. That was their error, not underestimating my strength, not miscounting my limbs or misreading my speed. They had not read the file. I pulled out the station communication tablet and started a new message to my mother. I typed, "Am fine. Had an interesting few days. Will explain when I'm back. Also, you were right about the posting. It is sometimes not that quiet." I sent it, and put the tablet away. Tehil was asleep against my shoulder. Out past the docking bay, somewhere in the vast and still largely uncharted stretch of stars that humanity had only recently begun to move through, there were other species who had known about us quietly, who had said among themselves never approach the humans, and had never explained why. And there were others who had not known, and were now learning. And there were others still, who would not learn until they had their own version of the last 3 days. That was all right. We were patient. We had always been patient. We had also always been exactly what we were, and we did not change that for anyone. I leaned back on the bench, let my eyes close for the first time in 3 days, and let the station's recycled air wash over me, and I thought about the stars, and I let myself rest too. I had earned it. And tomorrow, when the diplomatic vessel arrived and the debriefs began, and the formal consequences of the last 3 days started to take their proper shape, I would get up and do whatever needed to be done, steadily and without stopping, the way I always had, the way my species always had. Because that was what we were. Not the biggest thing in the galaxy, not the fastest or the best armed or the most ancient, just the ones who did not quit. And in the end, In every terrain and every situation, and every contest that had ever mattered since the first of us stood up on a difficult planet and decided to stay standing, that had always been enough.